What if I told you that 26,000 firearms, once owned by federal law enforcement, have been recovered from crime scenes across the country? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. And here's the real kicker. Those guns didn't just vanish on their own. They were either stolen, sold illegally, or lost by the very agencies that are supposed to regulate firearms. This isn't just about missing weapons. It's about hypocrisy. Because if you or I lost just one gun and ended up in a crime, you better believe the ATF would come knocking on our door. But when ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, loses millions of dollars in firearms and ammo, what happens? Almost nothing. No arrests, no accountability, just a promise that they'll do better next time. So where did this gun actually go? How did they get from ICE armories to criminal hands? And most importantly, who is responsible? Stick with me, because in this video, we're breaking down how $100 million in federal weapons vanished. Where did they end up? And why is there a double standard when it comes to gun laws in America? For years, ICE agents have been losing, misplacing, or outright selling firearms and ammo, and if it weren't for a federal audit, most of us wouldn't even know about it. A few years ago, an internal audit was conducted on ICE armories across the country, and the results were shocking. More than $100 million worth of guns and ammo were missing. And I'm not talking about a few misplaced sidearms. I'm talking about thousands of rifles, handguns, and cases of ammunition that simply disappeared. Now, let me put that into perspective. If a private gun dealer lost even a handful of firearms without documentation, the ATF would shut them down instantly. But because this was a government agency, the response was basically, whoops, we'll try to be more careful next time. No criminal charges, no mass firings. No one was held accountable. And it's not like these weapons stayed missing forever. They started showing up in crimes confiscated from drug traffickers, smugglers, and gang members. Some were even recovered near the US-Mexico border, found in the hands of cartels. At this point, the question isn't just where they went, it's how they got there. The government has a dirty little secret when it comes to lost or stolen guns. They don't go looking for them until they show up at a crime scene. Whenever a gun is recovered at a crime scene, the ATF conducts a reverse trace, meaning they track where that firearm originally came from. This is usually how they bust illegal firearm sales, identifying whether a gun was purchased legally before ending up on the streets. Well, in the last few years, 26,000 firearms used in crimes were traced back to federal agencies, and a huge chunk of those were ICE-issued weapons. Let that sink in. We're not talking about few stolen handguns. 26,000 federally owned weapons have been recovered at crime scenes across the country. Some in gang busts, some in cartel operations, some in violent crimes right here on American soil. And that's just the number of guns that have been recovered. Who knows how many are still floating around, waiting to be used in the next robbery, shooting, or drug trade deal? Now, if this were you or me, we'd already be in jail. If you sell a gun legally to someone and that gun ends up in a crime, you better have paperwork proving you sold it legally, or you're in deep trouble. Yet somehow, ICE can misplace $100 million worth of weapons and ammo, and no one's facing charges? So now we know where these guns went. The real question is, how did they get there? Because you don't just lose 26,000 guns by accident. How did the guns go missing? So now we know where these guns ended up, on the streets, in the hands of criminals, and even in cartel territories. But that leads up to the next big question. How did they get there? Because you don't just wake up one morning and realize 26,000 guns are missing. Let's go through the possibilities. First, inside theft. This is the most obvious explanation. Some of these weapons were likely stolen by corrupt agents, either directly from ICE armories or through illicit sales. We've seen cases where law enforcement officers sell firearms under the table for extra cash. And when it comes to ICE, The lack of oversight makes it ridiculously easy to get away with. Second, poor inventory tracking. Believe it or not, many federal agencies have terrible gun tracking system. Some of them don't even require routine audits. That means thousands of weapons can disappear without anyone noticing until years later when an external audit forces them to take a look. By then, too late. Those guns are already circulating in criminal networks. Third, intentional government sales gone wrong. Some law enforcement agencies actually sell off old guns through auctions or approved dealers. But in ICE's case, these weapons weren't sold through legal channels. They're just gone. No paperwork, no transaction history, just vanish into thin air. Now let's compare that to how they treat us, the average gun owner. If one of my personal firearms ended up in a crime, I'd be immediately investigated. If I had no bill of sale proving I transferred ownership legally, I could be held liable. But when ICE loses 26,000 firearms, the response is basically, oops, no arrest, no mass firings, just a vague promise that they'll do better next time. This is what government hypocrisy looks like. They want stricter gun control for civilians while failing to control their own firearms, and in the process, they're arming criminals, cartels, and street gangs with taxpayer-funded weapons. It's beyond incompetence. It's criminal negligence. So if you're wondering why there's a gun crime problem in America, maybe it's time to start looking at the government's own role in fueling it. What this means for gun laws and government accountability. Here's the part that really ticks me off. The same government that loses 26,000 firearms is the same government that wants to restrict your right to own guns. Let that sink in. Every time a new gun control law is proposed, it's always aimed at private citizens. Legal gun owners like you and me, they want more background check, more restrictions on certain firearms, and even outright bans. But where are the restrictions for them? If the government can't even keep track of its own arsenal, why should we trust them to regulate ours? And here's the reality. Criminals don't follow gun laws. That's why they're criminals. So when thousands of government-issued firearms end up in the hands of criminals, that's not because of legal gun owners. It's because of federal incompetence. Yet, instead of holding ICE accountable, politicians and anti-gun groups just keep blaming the Second Amendment. It's absolute hypocrisy. Let's look at the bigger picture. If the ATF audits a private gun store and they find even a single missing firearm, that store can be shut down immediately. The owner could lose their license, get fined, or even face criminal charges. So why doesn't that same level of enforcement apply to federal agencies? If a civilian gun dealer lost 26,000 guns, they'd probably be serving time in federal prison right now. But when ICE does it, not a single agent has been held responsible. No criminal investigations. No accountability. This isn't just a problem. It's a double standard. And worst of all, these missing guns are fueling violent crime. Some of them are being used in gang shootouts. Some are crossing the border into cartel hands, and yet no one in Washington seems to care. So let me ask you this. If the government can keep track of its own guns, why should we trust them with our Second Amendment rights? It's time for some real accountability. Either they follow the same laws we do, or they need to stop pretending they have the moral high ground when it comes to gun control. Because right now, the biggest supplier of illegal firearms in this country might just be the federal government itself. I want to take a step back for a moment and share a personal experience, because this isn't just some abstract government failure. It's real, and it could happen to any one of us. Years ago, I sold a small .22 LR lever action rifle to a friend. Nothing fancy, just a basic training rifle. Then, one day, I got a voicemail from the FBI. Now, let me tell you, getting a call like that will stop your heart for a second. Before I even called them back, I reached out to the friend I had sold it. Man, is there something I need to know? What happened to that rifle? He assured me it was sitting right where he left it, safe and sound. Turns out, When I finally spoke to the agent, they had made a clerical mistake in their trace log. The gun wasn't mine. I had nothing to do with the case. But before they realized their error, they were already treating me like a suspect. That's how serious they take a single firearm. One gun. Now imagine if I had been sloppy with my records. Imagine if I hadn't kept track of who I sold it to. You better believe I had been in some serious trouble. Yet here we are, talking about 26,000 missing federal guns. And no one in ICE is getting grilled like I was. No one is losing their jobs. No one is under investigation. It's not about whether or not a gun goes missing. It's about who's missing it. When it's the private citizens, they bring down the hammer. When it's the federal government, it's just another bureaucratic blunder. This is the double standard in action. So if one misplaced gun was enough to get a federal agent calling me, why is it 26,000 missing ICE guns sparking a national outcry? With so many stolen and unaccounted for guns floating around, here's something you need to do today. Check your firearms. Keep records of what you own. Track your serial numbers. You might be surprised to learn that some people accidentally own stolen guns and don't even know it. These missing ICE weapons, a lot of them end up in pawn shops, private sales, or even legitimate gun stores. You walk in, see a great deal on a firearm, buy it, only to find out later that it's a stolen gun. And guess what? If that happens, it's on you. Law enforcement won't care that you didn't know. You could lose the gun, lose money, and even get caught up in legal trouble. That's why I always recommend running serial numbers before buying any used firearm. There are databases that let you check if a gun is reported stolen. It takes few minutes and it can save you a huge headache. We can control what the government loses, but we can sure as hell protect what's ours. Take inventory, keep records, and be smart about where you buy your guns. Because if we've learned anything from this mess, is that we can trust the government to do their job. So here's where we stand. 100 million in guns and ammo missing. 26,000 federal firearms found in crimes. Zero accountability from ICE or the government. Yet they expect us, the law-abiding gun owners, to jump through hoops, fill out paperwork, and follow every single law to the letter. Enough is enough. If the federal government can even track its own guns, they have no right to lecture the rest of us about gun control before they push for more restrictions on private gun ownership. They need to clean up their own mess. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What do you think should happen to ICE for losing all these guns? Should heads roll? Should there be arrest? Or do you think this will just get swept under the rug like everyone else? And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Most people watching aren't subscribed, and hitting that button helps push these stories out to more people. The link's right below. Finally, before we wrap this up, I just want to say thank you to everyone who supports this channel. Keep staying informed, protecting your rights, and holding the government accountable.